Hello and welcome to another episode of the Access Vikings podcast. I'm here with Ben Gessling and Michael Rand of the Star Tribune in Eagan. We're at TCO Performance Center where the Minnesota Vikings are preparing for their playoff game against the Los Angeles Rams. It might be played in LA. It might be played in Glendale, Arizona. The Vikings are still waiting to figure that out, as is the NFL and the Rams and everybody else. But as Kevin O'Connell said this week, they know the game will be played. It's just a matter of where. So we're here to break all that down for you guys and what's happening here in Minnesota on that front. So let's start with the Vikings having to go back to Los Angeles, where they've already lost a game back in October. These storylines run amok with O'Connell, McVay, the connections there. This is the second time they're facing each other since O'Connell came back to Minnesota. Ben, I guess we should probably start with O'Connell's connection to Southern California and just the fact that he's not only preparing for a game that is going to weigh heavily on his future contract negotiations, on this organization, but also weigh heavily on his heart and the fact that he said today he knows people that have lost their homes in Southern California.
Yeah, he said he's been in touch with friends who have lost everything. He's been in touch with Sean McVay, kind of asking how he's doing with his own house, and then just knowing a lot of people with the Rams organization that live in the areas affected by this. I don't know that anybody that he's talked to from the Rams has been directly affected in terms of losing their home, but yeah, it's something that hits home for him in a way that it probably doesn't for a lot of people. He talked about, living in San Diego as a kid, grew up in San Diego. He said his last college game was postponed because of wildfires in San Diego. It was, I think, October of 2007. It was a game against BYU that they ended up making up in December. So his last game became one that was postponed because of wildfires. I remember living there as a kid. And they happen. And he said this today, they happen. You know they're going to happen every once in a while because those Santa Ana winds are dry and, fires need dry things to burn and wind to help sustain them. And this has both of those things. So, but he said it's never something that you're just kind of like, oh, well, there goes another one, because the devastation, anybody that's seen the pictures doesn't need me to tell them what the devastation's been like. So yes, it hits home for him in a different way.
It does, and they're going to have to find a way to just focus on football and try to keep their focus on that, because this team is reeling after getting just destroyed on Sunday night in Detroit, trying to lick their wounds. And they keep talking about the ways that they've bounced back from adversity before, the way that Sam Darnold's bounced back from bad games. Mike, how confident should they be just in general about where they're headed here with this offense and this team that's trying to have a different result than they had last time in Los Angeles?
Well, I think they can feel good about how Darnold has bounced back this year. If he had like gone into some sort of prolonged slump where okay, one bad game led to 4 bad games, and then all of a sudden he turned it back around, you might be more concerned. But he played his best football after that Jacksonville game. Really turned his whole what had been a good season to that point into a conversation where is he like a dark horse MVP candidate kind of stuff? They're winning. The second half of the season after that Jacksonville game felt like they were winning more because of him than just as him as a contributor or as more of the kind of game manager mode. So I think they have to feel good about that. What's difficult is, he's done that. Yeah, he had a good game, I think, the first time out against the Rams, too. He wasn't the reason they lost that game. They just couldn't stop anybody in that game. And
that was the day that began with all the Matthew Stafford stuff.
That's right.
Trade rumors.
Will they trade for Will they trade for Matthew Stafford? Because the Rams were 2-4 at that point. And there's one more loss away from trade deadline being ugh. And so, there was that element. He played well in that game, I thought. They didn't win. They couldn't stop anybody in that game. But the hardest part of this is that Darnold hasn't been in games like this in his career. He's never played a playoff game. The biggest game of his career was last week against Detroit. And let's face it, he's had a lot of bad games in his career. That was one of the worst games of his career, just objectively from the missed throw rate kind of perspective, from everything. So can they trust him in this game, seeing how he played in that game? It's going to be a big question. I don't think they'll know until the game starts, because he was off from the beginning against Detroit.
Yeah, Ben, what did you think about what O'Connell had to say earlier this week when he mentions that your mindset and your mechanics can kind of go hand in hand in a game like that, and it all seemed off for him?
It did. He looked jittery. It looked, frankly, like some of the games we've seen where Kirk Cousins gets out there and you're like, this isn't right.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of tell right away. His footwork was something they've praised all year because he throws from such a strong base that he can put it on a line and still throw with enough touch to fit it over a linebacker's head. He did not have that on Sunday night.
And almost everything was high.
Yes,
or
everything
long.
was high. Yep, and that cost them a lot of points because it happened in the red zone enough that it's a different game. I mean, that game was close, and they're sitting there thinking, even though he's missed some throws, we have a chance to steal this, and then the issues continue into the second half. But yeah, I think if the mindset affected the mechanics, you have to get two things fixed, and maybe one fixes the other. But that's a harder thing to know and to fix if that's truly in his head. I mean, it'll be interesting to hear kind of through the week how this all shakes out for them. And I don't know that anybody will tell us, yeah, I had the yips, or yeah, I was rattled. I don't think he was going to admit that, but I mean, the eye test certainly makes you wonder that.
Mm-hmm. And Sam Darnold famously saw ghosts back in that was 2018, 19, long time ago for him with the Jets. A different quarterback back then, but this is the first time he will play in a playoff game in his career. It was probably the biggest and most playoff type atmosphere he's ever been in on Sunday night in Detroit.
And you can look at it one of two ways, right? One, like maybe it was good that he went through it in that moment. Maybe it was better that he had a game with so much on line, because that was essentially a playoff game, right? Like you're not eliminated, but like your path is completely different.
You go around further than the team that loses. Yeah, directly in that in that game.
That game was worth 2 games basically. Yep. That game was worth an automatic advancement to the division round. So that it is essentially a playoff game. So maybe it's good to feel that in that moment instead of having a week 17 game against or week 18 game against the Giants, where it's like, okay, yeah, something's at stake, but you're not playing a team. You don't feel it the same way. So maybe you can look at it and say, okay, he has gone through it now once. He knows what that can feel like. Maybe he can settle that down and be different in this game. But again, there's got to be something in the back of his head. And Detroit gave the Rams a lot of film to look at to say, okay, Sam Darnold was rattled. This is how they rattled him. Let's do some of that.
I mean, having a massive crowd may have helped too. I mean, that's not going to be the case with the Rams.
One way or the other.
It's not going to look the same that way. But yeah, a lot of the pressure looks and a lot of the things they did, I'm sure the Rams will take note of that.
Yeah, and let's talk about this Rams defense before we shift and focus on the offense and the Vikings defense, because Darnold's going to face a Rams defense that has been playing fairly well ever since they lost to Buffalo 44-42 or whatever it was, the shootout. The Rams gave up 6 touchdowns to Josh Allen. They've played well in the 3 games since. It was against bad opponents, but they kept those teams down, including a win 19-9 against a fully healthy Arizona Cardinals team going into it. They've done fairly well with the young kind of group they've got, with Jared Verse on the edge, Fisk in the middle. They've got two really good safeties that have been playing well for them as well. Their corners have played very tight coverage. They've been a tough team to get a ton of yards against. However, they give up a ton of yards on the ground. I think they rank 24th in run defense, 4.6 yards per carry. So this is a group that you can at least find some creases against. The problem was Aaron Jones couldn't in that game in week 8. He carried 19 times for 58 yards, couldn't do a whole lot to help Sam Darnold. It had to be all on him. So that kind of formula makes this whole Darnold bounce back kind of shaky in terms of if you can't run the ball again, and you haven't been able to run it very well recently, it's going to be all on Sam like it continues to be throughout this season.
Yeah, and will they commit to running the ball? Yeah. And it's always that's always a hard thing, because just run the ball more. Analytics would not suggest that the cumulative effect that typically old school football guys who may now be working in Dallas would suggest there is. For now, yes. Analytics would not suggest that happens. Old school football guys that are currently working in Dallas probably weren't consulting those a ton when forming their opinions. But regardless, it is a difficult thing, because if you're not running it, I think Kevin O'Connell's attitude or his outlook, and he's talked about this, is I'm not going to go waste plays. If we're running for a yard or 2, I'm not going to run it just for the sake of continuing to do it or establishing it or using it as an identity or something like that, when it means that I'm dealing with a 3rd and 8. I get it, but at the same time, it does seem sometimes like you have to make a little bit of an investment there to just kind of get a running back into a rhythm, to get an offensive line into a rhythm, even if there's not a wear and tear on the defense in the way that people traditionally think. I do think there's something to just getting into a groove with a running game that I don't know how well they invest in that to make that happen.
It's nice to have one too, Mike, when your quarterback's not doing well.
It is, but it's also like what Ben said, like just statistically, pass plays gain more yards than running plays. Like if you commit to the run or overcommit to the run, you're going to find yourself in 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5 a lot, which is manageable. But someone bats down a pass, you get a drop, you get a pressure, you're punting all of a sudden. Like in a game where possessions are going to be so valuable in a league now where 3rd down is such a big deal, like staying out of 3rd down, like it's hard for me to imagine the Vikings on any possession Monday running on 1st and 2nd down unless it's like 2nd and 1, because I just don't think you can afford to get into 3rd and anything if you can avoid it.
And Vikings coaches said this week after their dismal offensive performance that what we learned and what we've learned from the 2021 Super Bowl run is that your great players have to make great plays.
Yep.
And they just did not do that on Sunday night in Detroit. So they're going to have to get better performances from Sam Darnold, obviously, TJ Hawkinson as well, Jordan Addison, Jefferson, the whole bit, because it wasn't just on Darnold, although he was the primary culprit. They didn't play well collectively in that game, including an interior offensive line that's now going to go against a Rams defense that, with some young talent up front, can generate pressure. And we saw that the last time they played them too.
I mean, I say this knowing there's a lot of things that go into this. It's the line, it's the coverage, it's how the quarterback does. But don't you think Justin Jefferson could use a massive day in a playoff game? I know he's only played the one. He didn't have a massive day against the Giants. And again, some of that was pressure on Cousins and all those things. But a transcendent performance from a superstar player is not on his resume, at least in the NFL yet, in this kind of stakes.
No.
So, again, not his fault completely that he hasn't been in these stakes a lot, but it would help for him to have that kind of a day. I mean, he's already thought of incredibly highly. He's paid incredibly highly, but he's a guy that cares about legacy. He cares about all of these things. A lot of the legacy that Jerry Rice created is in playoff games. So I feel like that would be something that, as he's kind of just thinking about all of this stuff and for the sake of winning the game, it would help.
I was going to say it would help the team quite a bit to win if Justin could have that kind of a game, even if Hawkinson, Addison could play up to what we're used to them playing. But Jefferson had some rough moments. He dropped a pass in that Detroit game. One of the only Addison catch was a screen blown up because Jefferson didn't block Amik Robertson on his side. There were just some moments where you're looking at that going, you need to play better, even if your quarterback is not playing better himself. So going into this one for the Vikings, all the talk will be about Darnold. All the talk will be about the Rams defense against him and what he can and can't do. However, last time they played, Matthew Stafford threw 4 touchdowns. Last time they played, the Vikings admittedly now were not ready for Puka Nacua. Brian Flores came out this week and was honest and candid, and commend him for his honesty and letting us know that they activated him a day and a half before this game. We were not expecting him to come out there and be a focal point of this offense. He had over 100 yards in that game. I think it was 10 catches, 129 yards or something like that. Ben, how much more prepared and how much better should Vikings fans feel now that the Vikings expect what's going to be happening from the Rams?
Yeah, I think that's a big difference. I mean, he said they found out about 4 hours before the game. And what I don't know is, was that a reported leak, or did they have somebody in the organization? I mean, O'Connell still has a lot of connections there. Wes Phillips does too. I don't know that. It doesn't really matter at this point, but everybody says, well, they had 4 hours. You can't do a lot. Your game plan's in. You can't practice at that point. You can't kind of go through that many major changes to what you're going to do. You just have to kind of come up with solutions and do the best you can on the fly. And even if he played, I don't know that anybody expected him to be as involved as he was. I think it makes a difference that they have a plan. I think it makes a difference they have Blake Cashman back, which they did not in that first game. So, yeah, I think it helps, certainly, because he was a big factor in why the Rams were as productive as they were.
And I think, though, if the Vikings are being honest, they're not preparing for a 10-17. They're basically preparing for an 8-2 team, because that's what the Rams were basically at full strength this year, right? Like when they were started 2-4, that was without Puka, that was without Cooper Kupp in a lot of cases, right? So the Rams at full strength went 8-2 after starting with that Vikings game. Then they rested everybody last week and lost. Didn't matter a whole lot, although it set up this matchup, which apparently they weren't terribly afraid of having to play the Vikings or the Lions. Whoever was going to lose that game would be their opponent if they lost that game, and certain things went and Tampa Bay also won, I think, had to happen, but they weren't scared of this game. It doesn't seem like. So this is a Rams team that you might look at it and say 10-7, 14-3 should beat them. It's a pretty good team.
Yeah, the Rams decided to rest their starters in the season finale, not knowing if they were going to face the Vikings or the Lions if the Vikings had won that game. So they weren't afraid of whoever, and they chose rest for a 36-year-old quarterback, a 31-year-old receiver, and Cooper Kupp, who statistically has not been that guy toward the end of the season. It's been all Puka Nacua. And the Rams offense has not been great toward the end of the season. They've had to eke out wins against bad teams, including the Jets.
They even scored 20 since that Bills game.
Those three, I think it's 3 or 4 games since, and it was just 3 games with Stafford. Stafford, though, has played incredibly efficient ball. He's not turning it over very much. He's become the kind of hyper efficient game manager that Sean McVay has wanted him to be, and not the interception leader, gunslinger he was in Detroit. So even though as he's aged, for what he's lost physically, he's still been incredibly mentally sharp.
Yeah.
We obviously know there's not much they can do to fool him before the snap. But Ben, you remember that game in LA before in October where he's spinning away from Jonathan Grenard and throwing sidearm touchdown passes. That's the kind of stuff he's still capable of doing. And I suppose when you evaluate and analyze what's going to happen in this game, that's the only stuff to me that scares me about this team, is that if he can turn back the clock and be the guy who looks 10 years younger, what do you do?
Well, and that's the thing. While Stafford's washed, it's like we're not playing a 162-game baseball season here. It's one day. And if he's on that one day, I mean, maybe they get beat the next week, but as the Vikings know from their practice squad quarterback, having one big day,
elevated to the standard roster now.
Elevated to the standard roster, yes, you were correct. Daniel Jones is who I'm talking about, of course. He had the big day against the Vikings in 2022, gets paid because of that. So if Stafford has that kind of day, he's had that experience. We saw it. It was a lot of quick passes to beat that blitz in that first game. But yes, the one where he's rolling to the left and getting away, and I think kind of split maybe Harrison Phillips on that play too. I recall Harrison Phillips having a shot at him. He still has some of that in his bag. And if it's a low-scoring game, you don't need him to do that 6 times. You maybe need him to do it once or twice. And if that happens in a close game, I think it could be a big factor.
Yeah, and the Vikings didn't play great, at least at the end of the game defensively. But in Detroit, they played really well to start. That game is 10-9. Was it in the third quarter, halftime?
Well, it was going to be
10-9.
10-9. Well, yeah, because I think they got stopped.
It was 10-6 at halftime.
Yeah.
And then the Vikings got a field goal.
Kicked out of bounds. It was 7-6. Riker kicked out of bounds, basically spotted at 3.
But it was 10-9 middle of the third quarter.
Yeah.
So they were holding them down in that game, and then Detroit scores. Riker misses a long field goal. Detroit scores again, and it's just kind of floodgates open.
And if I remember correctly, that game is only 17-9, top of the fourth. It's still a one-score game.
Yeah.
It's just the floodgates open, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Defensively, they couldn't stop Jahmyr Gibbs after that one breakdown early in the game where Cam Bynum misses the tackle and he goes for a 25-yard touchdown. But then late in the game, they just had so many breakdowns. How concerning is that? Or is that just you expect this defense, which had been playing so well, had played really well against the Packers, played well early against the Lions. Is that just a worn down defense, or is there anything to, hey, this has been a worn down defense the whole freaking year, and this is kind of where we're headed?
And it's the oldest defense in the league in a lot of metrics. So I think that is something to consider. And that is where the run game, I think, does have an effect, is if you are able to condense the clock and use your running game to win time of possession. They did not do that last week, and they only had the ball for like 23 minutes in that game. So if you can help your defense with a running game, I think it matters. I think the Rams certainly are not the Lions in terms of the running back or the offensive line, which is a big factor for the Lions. But Kyron Williams, and then they've been able to run it effectively enough that I think that is going to be a factor. If the Vikings have guys that you start to see that wear and tear, we've seen in the playoffs before. We saw it with a lot of Mike Zimmer's teams. I think preserving your longevity in that spot is going to be an important factor in this one too.
And they need a rejuvenated pass rush. Like, I feel like the beginning of the year, we were talking about a team that could lead the league in sacks. I don't know where they wound up, but it has disappeared inconveniently at times this season, where if you don't get home with the blitzes or don't get home with 4 when you're playing coverage, like it lets a quarterback like Goff, like Stafford, either beat you with those quick passes like Goff did a couple times when they blitzed him, or a guy like Stafford's going to pick you apart too with some of those kind of quick in rhythm plays to Puka. So the pass rush has to be there in this game for them to have a chance.
I would put a disruptive defensive lineman on the shopping list for the offseason.
Yeah, if
That's
you got
a conversation for another time. But
if you got a 3 technique interior defensive lineman that could rush the passer, that would help quite a bit.
Kevin O'Connell has some experience with one of those in the playoffs and how that can be helpful.
Aaron Donald, he's
all,
pretty good.
All the talk about
Could have been a Viking.
2021 Rams playoff run and Super Bowl run, people are asking around here, like, what can the Vikings learn from that? And I do think there are interesting lessons to learn from it, but you don't have Aaron Donald.
No.
I feel like that's one guy
Yeah.
you could just really, you
Didn't
can't
he make the
copy
play
and
that
paste.
sealed that Super Bowl? Because didn't he come off like pointing to his finger saying the ring's going to go right here?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So those, when you talk about Jefferson, superstars making great plays and great moments, that's the kind of stuff the Vikings need from their stars. They just do not have one on the interior line, even as good as Harrison Phillips and some of those guys have played.
Different type of player.
Yeah, different type of player entirely. But defensively for this group, I think they had enough. Cashman played for the first time against the Lions this year. He didn't play very well at times, misses a tackle on Gibbs on an early first down, also missed some tackles in the run game and some angles that he took. So he didn't have his best game.
He got cleaned up on a block on that touchdown too. He might have been out of his gap there, but yeah, I remember Jalen Reeves-Maben, I think or the fullback, but kind of moved him out of the way.
Yeah, I think I don't remember who broadcasted the game. It would have been Sunday night, so it would have been Chris Collinsworth or whoever. But yeah, somebody broke down about how Gibbs set up Cashman on that run.
Yes,
to be like, look, him set him up on the other side of the blocker, knew where he was going the whole time. Like that's the kind of stuff that great running teams do.
Yeah.
No matter how good you're playing as Blake Cashman at linebacker, that's going to happen. Kyron Williams still almost went for 100 yards, if I remember correctly, in that first game.
Yeah, I think you're right.
In October. So it's still going to be a focal point to stop the run. But in general, the focus is going to be on Nacua, Stafford, and trying to find a way to generate the pass rush you're talking about, because Goff was able to beat the blitz in ways that we just haven't seen too many quarterbacks do against them. There was one early where I think Metellus was a free runner off the edge and Goff just
whoops, the fourth down,
loops it over him. That's right. And then later on, though, it causes interception where Metellus or somebody tips the ball and it gets picked off. So
it's the fourth down and Gibbs scored on the next play.
So you live and die by that, right? I mean, it feels like this is going to be another one of those games where they live and die by the aggression that they're going to keep throwing at the quarterback.
Yep, that's probably true. And we have seen games in Matthew Stafford's past where he gets beat up by that Vikings pass rush. I mean, this is kind of the older days of it, but his mobility certainly showed up a little bit. But, hitting a 36-year-old quarterback, he starts to feel those things. So you need to make sure he feels it.
You guys get the sense, and maybe a last thought, do you get the sense that they need this win to kind of validate their season in a little way? 14-3 kind of speaks for itself, but I feel like there's still some skeptics that have come out because of that 31-9 game, because of what Darnold did, that people are like, are they really that good? Even if we have enough evidence that we should be able to say they are that good.
I mean, this is hard because the over-unders were 6.5, 7 wins, whatever it was. They doubled that.
Yeah, they crushed that.
But the thing I would say is playoff games have major effects on optics, on narratives, legacies, things that owners weigh when they're making decisions about who to pay going into the future. Kevin O'Connell's contract has been a topic of conversation this week. If Kevin O'Connell goes into discussions with the Wilts, which they're going to have after the season, 0-2 in the playoffs, I think that's a different discussion than, hey, y'all haven't won a lot of playoff games around here. I just did it with Sam Darnold, and I'm going to have more cap space coming forward. So, maybe show me the money at that point, to quote a receiver from the place where they may end up playing this game on Sunday. But I think between O'Connell or Monday, whatever, O'Connell, Darnold, a lot of legacies, a lot of narratives, a lot of impressions get shaped by this stuff. And both O'Connell and Darnold have a chance to make a lot of money in the next few weeks based on how people perceive them. Is that fair? I don't know, but playoff games do this in the NFL.
Yeah. We should also mention Brian Flores' future as a potential head coach. He could continue to add to his resume if he wins this game, does it in impressive fashion against a Sean McVay offense. So far, he's had 3 teams reach out to him in the Jaguars, Bears, and Jets. Vikings fans don't want to lose him, but as much as we talk about playoff wins changing things, he could continue to add shine to his resume.
The last time he was in a playoff game, he beat Sean McVay in a Super Bowl, held him to 3 points. So then took the Dolphins job. I already had the Dolphins job, I think, lined up. But that was his closing, his send-off in New England was that game.
Yeah, and if Vikings fans think that the loss helped them keep Brian Flores in Detroit, he now can't interview for another week either.
Yeah,
so
could have done it this week if they had the bye.
Ben Johnson gets to go do his interviews or some interviews early for the Lions in his coordinator job. Flores has to wait at least another week. I think it's a great point, Mike, though, about potentially needing this kind of a win to validate this season, because we've talked ad nauseum about whether or not this 14-win season's already a success or not. But the playoffs, as Ben says, changes so much, and certainly will change a lot on the contract talks, the many that they will have this offseason. Thank you guys for listening, for watching. Please check out more of our work at StarTribune.com. You can follow all of our podcasts on YouTube or Spotify, Apple, wherever you get them. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, comment under this video. Tell us how much you like it and how good we look. Thanks again.